What happens when the most powerful person inside a prison starts breaking the rules they were sworn to enforce? This isn't just a story about abuse of power. It's about how far one woman went to control everything and how many lives she destroyed to keep her throne. They called her the Queen of Stanton, and not without reason. Warden Angela Hayes wasn't just the first black woman to run the Stanton Federal Correctional Facility in Mississippi. She was its face, its brand, its reformer. Under her watch, violence rates had dropped, education programs had expanded, and even the local press had started calling the prison a model for second chances. To the outside world, Angela was everything a modern leader should be: composed, principled, and quietly commanding. She wore tailored suits that radiated authority. She spoke in a calm, measured voice. When she walked down the prison halls, even the most hardened inmates stood a little straighter. To the men locked behind bars, she was part judge, part mother, part mystery. And maybe that's why no one dared to ask too many questions. Inside Stanton's red brick walls, where time moved like molasses and secrets fermented in silence, Angela Hayes had built a kingdom of control. She knew the schedule of every guard, the temperament of every inmate, the blind spots in the camera feeds. She could predict who was going to fight in the yard, who was hoarding contraband, and who was about to break. But the one thing no one predicted was her. On paper, Warden Hayes was incorruptible. But in reality, she was more dangerous than any man locked in that prison. But Angela hadn't always been this way. There was a time, years ago, when she still believed in the system she now manipulated. She was 24 when she first stepped into the criminal justice world, freshly graduated from Howard University with honors, carrying nothing but a leather briefcase and a fire in her chest. Her mother was a school teacher, her father a Vietnam veteran with a limp and a heavy silence. They didn't say "I love you" in her house growing up. They said "do better." And Angela did. She interned for a federal judge in D.C., eager, disciplined, always 10 minutes early and 2 notches sharper than everyone else. But what she quickly learned wasn't in any textbook. One day, during a closed-door meeting, she overheard her mentor, a man she had once admired, refer to her as the pretty diversity pick. She smiled on the outside, filed the insult away. The next day, she memorized the entire court docket and corrected him in front of the Chief Justice. He never looked at her the same again. Neither did she. Angela stopped believing that justice was blind. It saw race. It saw gender. It saw weakness. So, she erased hers. She changed her tone, her posture, the way she said yes, sir, and with respect. She learned to speak softly and carry a sharp file. Her next stop was the Bureau of Prisons, an assistant role at a medium security facility in Arkansas, where no one expected much from her. Within 3 years, she was deputy warden, not because she was nice, but because she was impossible to intimidate. Angela Hayes didn't just survive a system built by men for men. She learned to master it, and slowly, she began to reshape herself into a weapon. Not for justice, not anymore, for control. Her philosophy became simple. Men want power. Give them comfort instead. They'll trade anything for it. She never married, never had children, didn't have time for softness. Or maybe she was afraid of it. Somewhere along the way, that line between discipline and desire blurred. When she first touched a prisoner's hand, long before Tyrell Morgan ever entered her orbit, it wasn't about lust. It was about ownership, not love, not even attraction. It was about being seen and feared in the same breath. By the time she arrived at Stanton, Angela had already buried the part of her that once dreamed of reform. She didn't come to the prison to save anyone. She came to reign. It started quietly. No headlines, no reports, just a transfer. Tyrell Morgan, 26, former honors student, serving 10 years for armed robbery, though some said the evidence had holes. A smart kid with a good head on his shoulders and too much pride to beg for favors. Angela noticed him the first week he arrived. Tyrell kept to himself. He read books, worked out, never joined the gangs. And that, somehow, made him stand out, made him vulnerable. Angela made sure he got assigned to laundry duty, the same shift she often passed through alone. She started talking to him, first about books, then about his dreams, then about the injustice of the system. He listened, and for a while, he believed her. That's how it always begins. But what nobody at Stanton knew, what no one even suspected, was that Warden Angela Hayes was hiding a hunger. Not just for power, not just for respect, but for something far more dangerous. Intimacy, obsession, and control. And Tyrell Morgan? He was just the first. At first, it seemed harmless. Warden Hayes wants you to clean her office twice a week, the guard told Tyrell one morning. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Any job outside his unit was a break from the chaos. It meant breathing air that didn't reek of sweat and confinement. It meant silence, space, freedom, even if it was just 45 minutes, mopping a clean floor no one had stepped on. Angela was always working late when he showed up. She'd be sitting at her desk, hair pulled back, glasses perched on her nose, files open but untouched. She'd ask him questions about his past, his goals, whether he thought he deserved to be in there. It felt strange, intimate. He wasn't used to being seen. She wasn't used to being challenged. And yet, over time, the air between them changed. It began with gestures. She brought him books, off the record, let him borrow her radio during cleaning shifts, gave him second helpings from the staff dining area. "You're better than this place," she whispered one night. "Don't let it eat you alive." Tyrell wasn't dumb. He knew something wasn't right. But after 2 years behind bars, attention felt like oxygen. And from a woman like her, it felt like power. The first time she touched his hand, he flinched. The second time, he didn't. Soon, the favors escalated. Angela arranged for him to be transferred to a quieter unit. He had his own cell, access to gym equipment outside scheduled hours, warm clothes in the winter. No one questioned it. Inmates began to notice. So did some guards. But who was going to accuse the warden of favoritism? Angela was careful. Too careful. She kept records clean, story straight. And if someone looked too long, she reminded them who signed their paychecks. Tyrell, meanwhile, was falling deeper into something he didn't understand. Was it a relationship, a game, or just survival? He started lying to himself, telling himself he was using her too, that he had leverage, that maybe this was his shot at protection, at peace, at getting out early. But Angela wasn't just giving. She was watching, testing, tightening the leash. And when Tyrell began to pull away, saying he needed space, that it had to stop, Angela didn't yell. She didn't plead. She simply smiled and said, "You know too much to walk away." That night, Tyrell couldn't sleep. And he wasn't the only one. Tyrell thought he was the only one. He wasn't. Angela made sure of that. 2 months after things cooled off with Tyrell, Angela began taking interest in someone else, Darnell D. Carter. D was the opposite of Tyrell. Rough, loud, 30-something with prison tattoos and street bravado. He ran cards in the yard, knew every smuggling route, and didn't take orders from anyone. Except Angela. She played him differently. With D, she didn't use affection. She used status. She had his sentence reduced by 6 months through a disciplinary review, gave him access to a contraband-free zone, made sure his enemies were transferred. She made him feel like a king behind bars. And just like Tyrell, he thought he was special. Then came Isaiah Thomas, 29, quiet, artistic, in for assault, but with the soul of a poet. He painted murals for the rec room and wrote letters to his mom, every Sunday. Angela found him pure, innocent, easy. With Isaiah, she used pity. She told him she believed he was misunderstood, that she saw his heart, not his record. She'd meet him after evening lockdown in her office, under the pretense of rehabilitation sessions. Sometimes she cried in front of him, said she was lonely, that the world didn't understand women like her. And Isaiah, naive and eager to be loved, opened his heart to her, just like the others. 3 men, all different, all believing they were alone in her orbit. But Angela wasn't reckless. She ran her secrets like a syndicate, each relationship isolated, each inmate stationed in separate wings, each encounter timed to perfection. She kept the guards distracted, the logs clean, the threats quiet. And just in case someone ever got bold, she had leverage, letters, favors, recorded confessions, and in one case, a photo. She was playing chess in a room full of checkers. But power always slips, and lust always leaks. Rumors started to swirl among inmates. Some said Dee was getting special treatment. Others said Isaiah looked too happy. Tyrell, now more withdrawn and anxious, started piecing it together. He wasn't the only one, and that realization was a bomb waiting to go off. He began writing letters, not to Angela, not to friends, to an attorney, to a journalist, to anyone who might listen. He had dates, locations, names, even a small voice recording captured on a smuggled MP3 device. Angela found out. What happened next was officially logged as a suicide. Tyrell Morgan was found hanging in his solitary cell, just days before his next parole hearing. No signs of struggle, no camera footage, no foul play. At least, that's what the report said. But those who knew him knew better. And so did the warden. Tyrell's death shook the unit, but only for a moment. In prison, grief is rationed. Suspicion is swallowed. And fear is a survival tactic. The official story was simple. Suicide, solitary cell, homemade rope, no witnesses, no bruises. Just a broken man who couldn't face another year behind bars. Angela played her part well. She gave a solemn speech to staff. She ordered grief counseling sessions for the inmates. She even approved a mural in the library in Tyrell's memory. Behind closed doors, though, she was cold. "This is why we don't get too close," she told Officer Brandon Hayes, a rookie with big eyes and a small voice. Something about the way she said it sent a chill down his spine. Brandon Hayes had joined Stanton straight out of academy training, barely 24, and still believing in the mission. He wasn't like the older guards, the ones with 1,000-yard stares and pension countdowns. He still believed people could be redeemed. He remembered the first time he saw Warden Hayes up close. She walked past the intake gate, chin high, coat crisp, eyes scanning everything. She didn't shout. She didn't swagger. But somehow, everyone fell silent when she appeared. He admired her at first. A strong black woman commanding respect in a place built to crush it. That meant something to him. He told his mother about her on the phone, even used words like mentor. But that changed after Tyrell. Brandon had spoken to Tyrell only a few times, passing in the halls, brief check-ins during lockdown rotations. But there was something steady in the man's voice. Measured, even kind. So when Tyrell's death was ruled suicide, Brandon didn't buy it. Not because of what was in the report, but because of what was missing. No bruises on the hands. No delay in the response. No camera review because of system error. It didn't sit right. That's when Brandon started writing things down. He began a quiet log. Unusual favors, late-night office visits, shifts rearranged for no reason. He noticed Angela had a way of appearing generous while quietly rearranging the prison like chess pieces. Then came Darnell. Then Isaiah. And Brandon's log got longer. He wanted to say something. But where could he go? The assistant warden had once joked in the break room that Angela could fire you without lifting a pen. Internal affairs? They answered to her. Other guards? Most were either afraid of her or quietly complicit. So Brandon stayed quiet until Jamal read. Jamal didn't say much when he handed Brandon that envelope, just looked him in the eyes and said, "If something happens to me, this is the truth." That night, Brandon stayed late in the records office, pretending to inventory boxes. He plugged the USB into an old desktop no one used anymore. Listened, read, watched. Angela's voice. 3 names, dates, details. And just like that, admiration turned to nausea. For days, Brandon couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He kept hearing Tyrell's mother's voice from visitation. Calm, soft, asking if her son had been okay his last few days. He lied to her back then. Said Tyrell seemed fine. Now he wanted to make it right. Weeks passed. Whispers faded. And Angela? She didn't slow down. Her next problem was Darnell Carter. And he didn't go quietly. Darnell had grown bold, cocky, entitled. He started making comments, subtle at first, then loud enough for others to hear. He hinted at favors, and knowing things he shouldn't. He even tried to blackmail Angela, demanding early release in exchange for silence. He made a mistake. Angela smiled through it, promised to review his file, even gave him a steak dinner, special delivery from the outside. 2 days later, Darnell collapsed in the rec yard. He was dead before he hit the ground. The coroner blamed acute heart failure. Toxicology never came back. And just like that, 2 men who shared the same secret were gone. Only Angela knew how connected their deaths really were. Well, her and Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah took Tyrell's death hard. He'd been closest to him, even if they never admitted it. And when Darnell died too, Isaiah went quiet. Too quiet. Angela noticed. She asked him to come see her. That night, they met alone in her office. She poured him tea, told him she missed talking to him, said he was different. He stared at her hands, the ones that had once caressed his face. He didn't feel safe anymore. He asked questions. Did you ever love me? Angela's smile didn't reach her eyes. Don't confuse comfort with love, she said softly. One keeps you warm. The other burns you alive. 3 days later, Isaiah Thomas was found dead in the showers. Officially, accidental fall. Unofficially, broken nose, bruised ribs, water turned red. No cameras working in that wing, scheduled maintenance. Now there was only one left, Jamal Reed. But unlike the others, Jamal wasn't soft. He didn't feel. He didn't love. He observed, calculated, adapted. And now he understood exactly what kind of game Angela Hayes was playing. So he made a decision. He'd play along. Jamal Reed had seen it all. By the time he was 24, he'd survived 2 stabbings, lost his brother to a gang war, and done 5 years behind bars without shedding a single tear. So when Warden Angela Hayes took an interest in him, that smile, that softness in her voice, he knew something was off. He didn't fall for the act. He studied it. At first, he played the role she wanted, obedient, quiet, flattered. He accepted the late-night mentorship meetings. He let her believe she had him wrapped around her finger. But every time Angela let her guard down, Jamal filed it away. Every glance, every word, every weakness. He wasn't trying to survive her. He was trying to expose her. Tyrell was his friend. Not in the write your name on my arm kind of way, but the look out for anyone else will kind of way. When Tyrell died, Jamal knew. He knew it wasn't suicide. Then Darnell. Then Isaiah. 3 men, all dead, all connected by one woman. So Jamal got smart. He reached out quietly. His cousin on the outside had a friend who worked with a legal nonprofit. That contact became a bridge. Through a smuggled cell phone, hidden in a hollowed-out Bible, Jamal started sending messages. But he needed proof. Real proof. And to get that, he had to go deeper. Angela started trusting him. She let her walls down, just a little. She talked to him more, told him she felt alone, told him how the world never respected a woman in her position, that she'd given everything to Stanton, that no one ever really saw her. And Jamal? He nodded. He empathized. He recorded every word. But Jamal wasn't just recording. He was dancing with fire. To get Angela to drop her guard, he had to lean in closer than he ever thought he could. He told her things about himself. Real things. Moments from his childhood, his brother's death, the way prison had carved pieces out of his soul. He didn't lie. He just didn't tell her what he was doing with the truth. Some nights, after lights out, he'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if he was becoming like her, twisting intimacy into a weapon. Angela, for her part, started treating Jamal differently. She called him exceptional. She began referencing their conversations in front of others, subtly, carefully. She even suggested he help lead a pilot rehabilitation circle she claimed to be starting. A trap, he was sure, but one he had to walk into. Then came the test. One evening, she summoned him to her office and locked the door behind her. No lights, just a lamp and silence. Angela stared at him for a long time. Then she asked, "Have you ever felt like someone was pretending to care about you, just to get something?" Jamal froze. He knew this was it. The moment when the hunter senses another predator in the woods. So he lowered his eyes and said, "Yeah, when I was 8, my foster dad used to say all the right things. Made me feel safe. Then one night, he didn't." Angela didn't speak for a full minute. Then, quietly, she sat back in her chair and whispered, "That's when I learned to stop giving away pieces of myself." Jamal looked up. Their eyes locked. And for the first time, he saw not a warden, but a wounded strategist. Someone who had buried so much vulnerability, she could no longer tell it apart from strength. The moment passed. Angela stood, unlocked the door, and said, "You're dismissed, Mr. Reed." But Jamal knew what had just happened. She tried to smell fear, to hear weakness, to sense betrayal, and he passed. Barely. Later that night, Jamal wrote one line in his smuggled notebook. "She's testing me now. I have to stay colder than her." The game had changed. Angela had stopped seeing him as prey. Now she saw him as a possibility, or a threat. Using a small recording device sewn into his waistband, he captured every conversation, every whispered confession. Sometimes she called what happened with Tyrell a necessary consequence. Other times, she spoke of Isaiah as too fragile to survive this world. One night, she said, "I didn't kill them, Jamal. I simply didn't save them." And that was the moment he knew. He had her. Jamal sent the files out in pieces. Encrypted. Backed up. If anything happened to him, his cousin had instructions to go straight to the press, and to one person in particular. Detective Carla Jennings. She'd investigated Stanton years ago. She'd been shut down by higher-ups. But Jamal remembered her. He trusted her. And he knew she would listen now. But Angela wasn't stupid. She could feel Jamal slipping, even if she couldn't prove it. She began asking questions. Why was he suddenly so quiet? Why was he looking at her differently? The air between them shifted. She offered him a transfer. He declined. She offered him a phone call. He said no. Then she offered him freedom, a letter of support to the parole board. Jamal just smiled. "I'm not ready to leave yet," he said. And for the first time, Angela didn't smile back. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how close it was. Angela Hayes couldn't sleep. She'd spent 15 years controlling chaos, bending men to her will, silencing rumors before they became scandals. But now, something was off. Jamal Reed was off. He was too calm, too agreeable. She knew that look. It was the same look Darnell gave her before he tried to blackmail her. The same look Tyrell gave her the day before he died. Angela had learned one thing from all the men she'd broken. The quiet ones never stay quiet for long. So she made a decision. If Jamal had turned on her, if he had anything, she had to act fast. The plan was simple. On Friday, Jamal would be transferred to another facility for disciplinary restructuring. A transport van, 2 guards, no cameras, 1 accident. She'd done it before. What she didn't know was that Jamal had already planned for this. 3 days earlier, Jamal had slipped a small envelope into the hands of Officer Brandon Hayes, the young rookie who'd started asking quiet questions after Tyrell's death. Inside, a USB drive. On it, partial recordings, a letter, names, dates, times, and 1 handwritten line. If I don't make it out of this prison alive, she did it. Brandon didn't know who to trust, but he knew one thing. He couldn't bring this to internal affairs. They were too close to Angela, too afraid, or too loyal. So he went outside. Detective Carla Jennings still remembered Stanton. 6 years ago, she investigated a suspicious death inside those walls. She got stonewalled, gaslit, and pushed out. Angela Hayes had smiled in her face and shut every door behind her. Carla hadn't set foot inside a prison in 3 years. Not since the Stanton case nearly ended her career. Back then, she was a rising name in the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. Sharp, relentless, the kind of detective who asked one question too many. When a 31-year-old inmate named Lamont Ellis died under suspicious circumstances in solitary, Carla was the only one who thought it didn't add up. No camera footage, no autopsy photos, no witness statements. Just a line on the report. Psychological instability likely triggered fatal self-harm. But Lamont had written a complaint 2 weeks prior, citing mistreatment, isolation, and an unnamed female official exerting emotional control. Carla pushed. Hard. And that's when things got strange. Her reports vanished from internal servers. Her supervisor told her to stand down. A senior DOJ liaison privately warned her to pick battles worth fighting. Then came the anonymous performance review claiming she was too emotionally involved with victims. She got reassigned within the month. Cold cases. No press. No Stanton. Angela Hayes had erased her from the conversation without lifting a finger. But Carla remembered. She kept a copy of the Lamont Ellis report in her desk drawer. Just 1 page, yellowed at the edge. She never could prove it, but she knew. So when the package arrived, USB drive, typed letter, prison names, timelines, she didn't hesitate. She called an old friend at the U.S. Attorney's Office, Assistant Prosecutor Malik Hughes. They'd butted heads years ago, but she trusted him more than anyone else in the building. "You have 10 minutes, he said, after she showed him the evidence. She used 5. By the end of the meeting, Malik promised federal intervention. It would move fast, quiet, before Angela caught wind. That night, Carla returned home and opened the Ellis file again. She took a pen and added 3 more names beneath his. Tyrell Morgan, Darnell Carter, Isaiah Thomas. Then she underlined a 4th. Jamal Reed, still alive. But Carla didn't forget. When she got the anonymous package with Jamal's recordings and the timeline of 3 inmate deaths all tied to the warden herself, she didn't call her supervisor. She called the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then she got on a plane. Back at Stanton, Angela's paranoia grew. She started checking visitor logs, tapping into guards' emails, watching Jamal on the cameras, even when he slept. But it was too late. Jamal had already done the one thing Angela couldn't fight. He made others care. Friday came. The van was scheduled. Jamal was cuffed. 2 guards were ready, handpicked by Angela. But when they reached the gate, the van was stopped by federal agents. The night before the takedown, one more piece of evidence landed on Carla Jennings' desk. It came by mail, a manila envelope, no return address, postmarked from Louisiana. Inside, A faded photograph of a young black woman in prison blues. A handwritten letter. A medical report from 2015. And a name she hadn't heard in years. Keisha Franklin. The letter began. Detective Jennings, you don't know me, but I know her. Angela Hayes used to run Harbor Point Women's Correctional in Baton Rouge. I was there from 2013 to 2016. I was her first. Keisha had been 26 when she landed in Harbor Point on a parole violation. A quiet inmate. No priors. No drama. She worked in a library, stayed to herself, until Warden Hayes took interest. According to the letter, Angela singled her out for mentorship. It started with kind words, then small gifts, then emotional dependency. Keisha described it not as seduction, but psychological warfare. She talked to me like I mattered, like I was the only one in the whole building she saw as human. She'd tell me she believed in me, that I had leadership potential. I thought she cared. I was wrong. After 6 months, the dynamic turned darker. Angela allegedly used Keisha as a messenger to manipulate other inmates, rewarding some, punishing others. When Keisha resisted, the consequences were swift. She had me transferred overnight, Keisha wrote. No warning. Just gone. And I wasn't the same after that. Still ain't. Carla stared at the documents. The medical report noted Keisha had suffered a panic attack severe enough to require hospitalization just days after her transfer. She never told staff why. Now, nearly a decade later, she was finally speaking because she'd seen Angela's name in the news again. In a PS, Keisha added one final line. I didn't have proof then, but if Jamal Reed is who I think he is, tell him. I believe him. And I remember the way she smiled when she said, no one will believe you. The next morning, Carla handed the envelope to the U.S. attorney. And with that, Angela Hayes' past came back to haunt her, not just from within Stanton's walls, but from every prison she had ever ruled. One held up a file. Inside, transcripts, photos, voice logs, and a warrant. Angela Hayes was under investigation for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and 3 counts of murder. The expression on her face? Not fear, not guilt, just disbelief. For the first time in 15 years, Angela wasn't in control. The courtroom was silent, not out of respect, but out of disbelief. In shackles and a beige, jail-issued jumpsuit, Angela Hayes looked like a shadow of the woman who once ran Stanton with an iron smile. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung limp. Her eyes, once calculating, were now unreadable. But one thing hadn't changed. She still walked like she was in charge. The prosecution called their star witness first, Jamal Reed. The moment he stepped into the witness box, you could feel the shift. A former inmate, a survivor, a man who had outplayed the warden. He didn't speak with rage. He didn't cry. He spoke like someone who knew that every word carried the weight of 3 dead men. She didn't kill them with a knife, he said. She killed them with access, with silence, with fear. He laid it out. Secret meetings, favors, threats. Angela dangled hope like a carrot and snapped it away when obedience ended. And then he played it, the tape. Angela's voice, clear as day. I didn't kill them, Jamal. I simply didn't save them. You could hear the gallery shift in their seats. Some gasped. Some looked away. Angela sat motionless. No blink. No flinch. Just that same cold stare. Then came Officer Brandon Hayes. He confirmed the documents, the USB drive, the whisper from Jamal that changed everything. Next, the forensic examiner. Traces of poison in Darnell's system. Blunt force trauma to Isaiah's skull. Inconsistent with slipping in the shower. No bruising on Tyrell's neck. Inconsistent with self-hanging. Piece by piece, Angela's kingdom collapsed. Her defense attorney tried to paint her as a woman pushed too far, surrounded by danger, tempted by manipulative inmates. But the jury wasn't buying it, especially not when the prosecutor read her journal entry, seized from her office drawer. Men are weak. Give them attention, and they give you everything. Take it away, and they beg to die. Angela finally took the stand. The courtroom held its breath. She looked straight at the jury and said, "They came to me. They wanted comfort. They wanted protection. I gave it. I never forced anyone." She paused, "But they all betrayed me. And betrayal has consequences." Gasps filled the room. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor closed their folder. There was nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered every day of the trial. Some were activists. Some were former inmates. Some were just curious. But all of them came for one reason. Because when a prison warden is on trial for murder, it's not just a case. It's a reckoning. One woman, clutching a photo of her late brother, told a reporter, "I don't know if she had anything to do with his death, but I know the system didn't care until now." National media picked it up by day 2. Podcasts, panels, hashtags. Hashtag Stand and Cover Up began trending. Angela Hayes had once been praised as a reformer. Now she was being dissected as a manipulator hiding in plain sight. Half the country saw her as a monster. The other half saw her as a warning sign. What happens when unchecked power lives too long in silence? Inside the courtroom, the tension was no less real. Before the jury went into deliberation, the judge allowed a final statement from the family of one victim, Tyrell Morgan's mother. Mrs. Lorraine Morgan, a retired nurse with tired eyes and a trembling voice, stood before the court. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply said, "My son was not perfect, but he was alive, and he was trying. He wrote me a letter the week before he died. He said he felt hopeful." That's what she took from me, not just my son. She took his hope. In the back row, Jamal Reed closed his eyes. Officer Brandon Hayes bowed his head. When the prosecutor stepped up for closing, they didn't focus on policy or procedure. They focused on the pattern. This was never about sex or favors. This was about power. This was about a woman who turned human beings into pawns and discarded them when they stopped playing her game. Then came the final piece. The prosecutor displayed a simple image on the courtroom monitor. 3 photos side by side. Tyrell Morgan, Darnell Carter, Isaiah Thomas. 3 men, 3 stories, 1 warden, and beneath them, in bold font, the final quote from Angela herself. "I didn't kill them. I simply didn't save them." The courtroom fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't disbelief. It was judgment. On the 6th day, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. 3 counts of murder. 1 count of attempted murder. Abuse of power. Obstruction of justice. Sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Angela Hayes was going back to where she had ruled for 15 years, but this time in chains. Angela Hayes arrived at Claymore Women's Correctional Facility just after sunrise. The irony was cruel. She wasn't sent to a federal medical center or a private cell for former officers. No special treatment. No padded comfort. Instead, she was processed like every other inmate. Strip searched, photographed, handed a number. Hashtag 521979AH. The woman who once ruled a prison now slept with the lights on and ate from a tray. No title, no keys, no power. At Claymore, no one called her Warden Hayes. She was just Angela, another face in orange. Some inmates recognized her from the news. Others just watched her. The ones who knew what she'd done, they didn't speak to her. They stared. And Angela, once so calculated, so in control, began to shrink inside herself. She didn't cry. She didn't talk. She just watched the walls close in. Angela Hayes woke up every day to the sound of clanging doors and footsteps that didn't pause for her anymore. At Claymore Women's Correctional, nobody bowed their heads when she passed. Nobody stood straighter. Nobody cared who she used to be. Her cell was cold. Her mattress was thin. Her window faced a brick wall that never changed. But the worst part wasn't the confinement. It was the silence. For the first time in 15 years, no one sought her approval. No one feared her. No one needed her. And that, more than the strip searches, the cafeteria lines, the mandatory head counts, that was what crushed her the most. Angela had built a life feeding off the power of being seen. But in Claymore, she was invisible. She tried to keep her routine, woke up early, made her bed with military precision, folded her clothes, ate without expression. It was her way of maintaining control in a world that had taken it from her. But even that didn't last. One morning, during shower time, a younger inmate accidentally bumped into her, hard enough to send her stumbling. No apology, just a glare. Angela didn't say a word. She picked herself up, but the look in her eyes, briefly, wasn't defiance. It was shock. Shock that pain still hurt when you weren't in charge of it. Word spread fast in prison. Everyone had seen the trial. Everyone knew what she'd done, or what they believed she'd done. Some whispered, some stared, but most just ignored her. And for someone who had once moved mountains with a whisper, that indifference was a deeper punishment than any sentence. In the mess hall, Angela sat alone. Not by choice, by design. She saw the way the other women grouped up, bonded by pain, by time, by survival. She had never needed that. She had always been above it. But now, she was beneath it. A month passed. Then, too, she started sleeping less, talking less, eating less. At night, she'd sit on the edge of her bunk, staring at the cinder block wall. Sometimes, she'd hum to herself, an old gospel tune her mother used to sing when life got too heavy. One day, an older inmate named Reba, gray braids, hands like tree bark, sat across from her in the yard. Didn't speak, just sat. After a while, Reba looked at her and said, "You ain't the first queen that came through here thinking the world owed her something." Angela didn't respond, but something in her cracked a little. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that, not without consequence. The next day, Reba nodded at her again. Angela didn't nod back, but she didn't look away either. It was the start of something neither of them would ever call friendship. But in that world, eye contact meant survival. Angela began to write. Not legal briefs, not memos, just pages, scraps of thought, scribbled in the back of old religious tracts handed out by the chapel. She wrote about the men, about Tyrell, Darnell, Isaiah. She never used their names. She just called them the echoes. In one entry, she wrote, "I don't miss the power. I miss the silence between lies, when they still believed I meant something good." She never shared those pages, but somehow the act of writing made the nights less heavy. The warden who once controlled every inch of her world was now reduced to borrowed ink and cold showers. And yet, even then, even after everything, Angela Hayes refused to cry. Back in Mississippi, Stanton Prison was under full investigation. The warden's office was sealed. Staff were rotated. A special task force began re-examining every inmate death from the last 10 years. At least 2 other suspicious cases surfaced. The task force assigned to Stanton wasn't just federal, it was forensic. Comprised of DOJ investigators, civil rights attorneys, data analysts, and behavioral psychologists, the team's goal was not only to find what Angela Hayes had done, but to understand how she got away with it for so long. They started with records, work logs, visitation logs, staff rotation schedules, medical files, incident reports. Then came interviews, over 120 in the first month alone. Former inmates, correctional officers, medical staff, kitchen workers, chaplains. And with every voice, the same refrain echoed. I knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to say it out loud. One former guard admitted under oath that Angela regularly instructed him to disable camera 2B for maintenance. Only it happened during private meetings with select inmates. Another testified that Angela falsified transfer paperwork using an old administrator login, one the IT department never revoked. The forensic team uncovered metadata manipulation on dozens of internal memos. Files backdated, logs edited, complaints never escalated. The deeper they went, the more it became clear. Angela hadn't acted alone, not in the traditional sense. No co-conspirators, no official accomplices, but she had thrived within a system that rewarded silence and punished dissent. One internal memo, dated 5 years earlier, had a warning from a low-level counselor about inmate overfamiliarity with administration. The response? Watch your tone. Warden Hayes has full discretion. Even more disturbing, a pattern of unofficial transfers emerged, where inmates with behavioral stability or rehabilitation potential were suddenly reassigned or placed in solitary after brief contact with Angela. A psyche evaluator described it as emotional reprogramming via dependency. When the task force presented their findings to Congress, it wasn't just a scathing indictment of one woman. It was a 300-page autopsy of a broken machine. The Bureau of Prisons responded with urgency. A federal review was launched into staff accountability protocols. 3 regional directors were placed on administrative leave. 2 assistant wardens from Stanton resigned within the same week. An anonymous staff-wide survey revealed that over 60% of employees at Stanton had witnessed or suspected ethical violations but felt unable to report them. And perhaps most damning of all, an internal document revealed that Angela Hayes had once been flagged in a quiet performance audit for overreach of authority and non-standard inmate interactions. But the file was closed after a personal recommendation from a senior official in Washington. That official, now retired, declined to comment. When the final report was released to the public, it shook the corrections world. The headlines didn't just name Angela Hayes. They asked a larger question. How many other prisons have a queen we haven't uncovered yet? Within months, prison reform advocacy groups began pushing for what they called the Hayes Doctrine, a policy demanding third-party psychological evaluations for wardens every 5 years, along with rotating oversight teams. Senator Rosalind Briggs of Georgia, during a hearing, said, Angela Hayes didn't just manipulate men. She manipulated systems that were already willing to look the other way. For the first time in decades, Stanton wasn't feared for what was inside its walls. It was feared for what had come out. A former guard, retired early, came forward. He said Angela once told him in private, "Justice is only what you can bury without consequence." Detective Carla Jennings became a national figure overnight. She was praised for pursuing truth when others backed down. Her final statement to the press was simple. Angela Hayes used her position not to protect the vulnerable, but to prey on them. This was never about love. This was about control. And now, control is the one thing she'll never have again. As for Jamal Reed, he was granted early release under protective supervision. He refused interviews. He didn't want fame. He moved to Ohio, started work at a nonprofit helping inmates re-enter society. Quiet life. Private. Lorraine Morgan never moved out of her small house in Jackson. The porch still creaked. The flower beds still bloomed each spring. But the inside never felt the same after Tyrell. She kept his room untouched, books on the shelf, shoes lined neatly, a folded graduation photo on the dresser. Some nights, she'd sit in his chair and just breathe, as if the air still remembered him. When the news broke about Angela Hayes, Lorraine didn't cry. She just whispered, I knew it, and lit a candle beneath his picture. Justice didn't bring peace, but brought truth. And truth, for a grieving mother, was something to hold on to. She started volunteering at a reentry center for recently released inmates. Not because she believed the system had changed, but because she wanted to be part of someone's second chance. "I couldn't save my boy," she once told a young man with tear tattoos under his eyes, "but maybe I can help you stay out long enough to call your mama back." Across the state, Officer Brandon Hayes had quietly turned his badge. He didn't make a statement, didn't appear in interviews, just mailed a resignation letter and walked away. For a while, he disappeared, traveled, took odd jobs, tried to forget Stanton, but the memories stuck like old sweat on a uniform collar, always there, no matter how many times he tried to wash them off. Eventually, he found his calling, not in law enforcement, but in speaking. Brandon started giving talks at police academies and correctional training programs. His message was simple: authority without integrity is just theater. If you're not brave enough to question the system from within, don't be surprised when it swallows you whole. He never mentioned Angela Hayes by name. He didn't have to. Somewhere in Atlanta, Isaiah Thomas's mother, Denise, was still trying to forgive herself. For years, she believed the state when they told her Isaiah was uncooperative, volatile, resistant to rehabilitation. She hadn't visited him in 6 months when she got the call about his death. The official cause was accidental fall. Now she knew better. She kept all his letters in a shoebox. Read them every Sunday. Sometimes she'd whisper answers into the silence of her kitchen, hoping somehow they reached him. One letter had a line she never stopped repeating to herself. "Mama, I know I messed up, but I'm still your boy. Don't let them erase me." And then there were the nameless. The inmates who saw, who suspected, who said nothing. Some felt guilt, some felt relief. But all of them learned the same lesson. Silence doesn't protect you. It just delays the cost. At Claymore, rumors swirled that Angela Hayes was breaking down. Some said she stopped eating. Others said she talked to herself in her sleep. But for those who knew what she had done, who had lost someone to her manipulation, there was no sympathy. Only the hope that the walls would treat her the way she once treated everyone else. But every year, on the anniversary of Tyrell's death, he sent a letter to Tyrell's mother. No return address. Just one line: "I kept my promise." Angela Hayes never appealed her sentence. She didn't write a book, didn't speak to reporters, didn't apologize. In 2021, she was found sitting alone in the prison chapel, staring at the stained glass window, the one with a broken lamb in the center. When the chaplain asked what she was thinking, she whispered, "They want to love. I gave mortar. That should have been enough." But deep inside the hollow that silence carved, memories stirred. Before the title, before the crisp suits, before Stanton, she had been a girl named Angela Ruth Hayes, smart, ambitious, and desperate to prove herself in a world that only saw her skin and her smile. At age 19, Angela interned at the Louisiana State Judicial Center, a prestigious place with polished marble floors and whispered hierarchies. She was the youngest in the program, the only black woman, and for a while, she wore that badge with pride. Her mentor at the time was a senior prosecutor named Robert Kinley, a man who shook hands like he owned the air you breathed. He praised her work ethic, her intellect, her poise, and then, one late evening, he placed a hand on her back that lingered too long. Angela froze. He smiled and said, "You want to go far, don't you?" She didn't say a word. Not then. Not ever. She didn't tell anyone what happened in that elevator, or in his office a week later, or the way he whispered, "You're different from the rest," as if it were a compliment. Instead, she did what she always did. She got sharper, colder, more precise. She graduated with top honors, got into the bureau, rose through the ranks. But something in her had calcified. From then on, Angela Hayes didn't chase justice. She chased control. Because control meant no one could ever touch her again. Years later, she would read reports of men like Robert Kinley being quietly retired after complaints stacked too high. But by then, Angela had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Power wasn't just about what you could do. It was about what you could bury without consequence. And she had buried a lot. Then she turned her face to the light and never said another word. 2 weeks after Angela Hayes stopped speaking, the prison chaplain found something unusual beneath the pew where she always sat. Folded into a thin paperback Bible was a crumpled page torn from a personal journal. It had no date, just one sentence written in her tight, meticulous handwriting. I didn't lose control. I gave it away because even power gets lonely. The chaplain didn't turn it in. He folded the paper carefully, tucked it into his coat pocket, and said nothing. A few days later, Angela was transferred to the infirmary wing. She had lost 12 pounds in 6 weeks. Wasn't eating, wasn't responding, just stared out the window as if waiting for something that would never come. Nurses came and went. No one stayed long. The staff didn't pity her. They feared her in a strange, quiet way, like her silence held sharp edges. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, a young psych tech doing rounds found a message scratched lightly into the wall near Angela's bed. Not deep, not angry, just deliberate. For words, I was the system. No one knew exactly when she'd carved it. But when they told Detective Carla Jennings, she just nodded once and said, "That's exactly what scares me." Months passed. Claymore returned to routine. Angela became just another inmate with an empty stare. But the ghost of her legacy lingered far beyond prison walls. A podcast titled Queen of Stanton broke download records. A documentary crew began filming a series called Women of Power, When Leadership Turns Lethal. Congress quietly launched an inquiry into oversight practices in federal prisons. Angela never commented, but shortly before her 3rd year at Claymore, she requested a Bible from the chapel. When the chaplain handed her one, she didn't speak. She simply flipped it open, tore out the title page, and wrote, "To Keisha Franklin, you were the first mirror I ever looked into, and the only one that cracked." She left the note tucked inside the spine, hidden under binding glue. No one found it until she died. Angela Hayes passed away in her sleep in the spring of 2024. The official report listed cardiac arrest, but the doctor who signed her death certificate later told a reporter. She looked peaceful, but there was something in her face, like she'd finally won a game nobody else was playing. Her body was cremated. No family claimed her remains. She wasn't buried. She wasn't remembered. She was absorbed by the very system she once ruled. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves true crime as much as you do. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss another twisted tale of power, deception, and justice. We've got new stories every day, and trust me, the next one is even darker.